Conroy, you're the first person inducted into the FOTM Hall of Fame. And I've learned so much from you over the years, but I'll never forget your visit when we discussed the Magic Shadows theme and how Harry Forbes was more influenced by the Beach Boys' Feel Flows than the Beatles across the universe. That was a mind blow to me, a revelation. And I was so sorry to hear from you this past weekend that Harry Forbes has passed away. And we were chatting about this, and you said he soundtracked our golden age, and I'm honored that you carved out some time for me today to talk about Harry and some of his compositions.
Oh, bless you, Sir Michael. You know, we've talked about this a lot in the past. There's so many wonderful characters in Toronto media. And unfortunately, other than your program, there's not a lot of people talking about these legacies. So, you know, it's an unfortunate moment to be talking about somebody that's passed away, but if we don't do it, nobody else is going to, unfortunately. So, yeah, I found out on, I guess it was yesterday, Saturday morning, I got an email from Risa, who was the sort of producer, sort of fixer for Magic Shadows, who's still with us and just an absolutely incredible lady. She was Elwie Ost's sort of Girl Friday, if you will. And she let me know. And I was really, it was a lot of emotion because I had interviewed Harry in the past, but I had hoped to interview him many more times. I had a lot of burning questions still. And it was just another piece of history falling into the great abyss, especially when it comes to these programs and this TV Ontario history that we're fascinated by. There's just not many people left standing. So,
well, you were my first.
Thank you.
Like when I learned the news, of course, on your Instagram page. People should follow Retrontario on Instagram. So I learned it there, and then I remembered our chat about the Magic Shadows theme song, which we'll discuss more in a moment. Do you have any idea how old Harry was when he passed?
I don't. I mean, I would imagine, going by the medium age of those people, he probably was in his late 70s or early 80s. I mean, a remarkable body of work that is left behind. We'll get into the big ones, but I think what I've since we spoke, I guess it was a couple of years ago, about the Beach Boys, Beatles inspiration.
Yeah.
I've learned a little bit more about him, in that he just was one of these very prolific musicians who did a ton of library music. And every once in a while, something will come up, and it's Harry Forbes did the soundtrack for this, and it's all this kind of John Carpenter-esque synth, very 70s, very very eerie, spooky synthesizers. And I know you're a gang of music aficionados that do Toast and all that. They know about all these guys, right? I mean, that was a big important piece of what became synth pop, right? In the late 70s.
Ed, if we'll jump in, since you mentioned Toast, Rob Pruce sent me a note today because we were discussing the passing of Harry Forbes in the not so secret FOTM WhatsApp group. Let me know if you want in there, buddy. You're an FOTM Hall of Famer. But Rob Pruce just pointed out he loved the theme for Magic Shadows, which I want to get into with you. He loved it so much, he wrote, and he actually learned to play it. And at his solo shows, he had solo shows. I saw one in Oakville, actually. He would play the Magic Shadows song, so he's keeping it alive.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this so many times. That piece of music, obviously, is what he's going to be remembered for. By the most amount of people would have heard that. And it was a golden age. And that whole thing, the music, the animation, the presence of Elwie, the scheduling, the fact it came on kind of right after the kids shows, we've talked about that. All of those things added together make it a very important piece, I think, of sort of Ontario pop culture. 1974 to 1989. If you were there, you came across that, that's going to be with you for your life. for better or for worse. And it was funny you mentioned Instagram. You know, I of course, when I heard about his passing, I put that clip up. And I mean, just the absolute avalanche of responses from people, the same thing, right? Wow. You know, that thing just blew my mind as a kid, and I found it equally fascinating and terrifying. And I watched it with my dad, or I watched it with my grandma. And it all positive and all just, you know, it reminds us of that time when life was very simple and there was only 20 channels, you know. Right. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's lots of great theme songs for TV shows. That one just, it almost is ethereal. Like it goes to a place that is hard to describe, you know?
Yeah, it hits me right in the nostalgia bone. So sort of where that, we've talked about this in the past, but that Doctor Who opening would, like, it put fear in my, like, I can't touch Doctor Who to this day, man. Seriously, I'm scarred. But the Magic Shadows, like, I don't think I tuned in and watched El Wee Yost. Like, I would just see the opening and see this older dude, and I would hear that song and that animation. It was kind of trippy, but I was mesmerized by it. Like, and when I hear the opening chords, I'm right back, like, watching TVO. I feel like I watched more TVO than anything when I was a young man.
Yeah, I mean, the TV Ontario factor is so huge for us because we know it was a trusted source. It was a so-called electronic babysitter, right? It was tied to curriculum, so we watched it in class. It taught us how to read, how to do math, how to speak French, and then we came home and we watched it at home because our mums and dads were like, yeah, you just leave it on TVO. Right. They're not going to see violent death or, gross commercial exploitation.
Right.
So we saw a lot of TVO. We all did. And yes, there was that moment every day when it went from the children's, block into the adult block.
Right.
And it was a hard transition, man. There was no mixing, soft mixing there. Well, it was hard.
My memory is Polka Dot Door into Doctor Who. Like, that's a pivot, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was different every day of the week.
Okay.
And yeah, the Magic Shadows was Monday to Friday. So that was a constant. I think Doctor Who was Thursday and Saturday, but yeah, I mean, Magic Shadows for me was always something that it was like a grown-up show.
Right.
But that animation, it grabbed you and it freaked you out, and, you didn't know who those people were. Now we look at it, oh, that's the Marx Brothers and, Marilyn Monroe and Humphrey Bogart. You can see all the Golden Age Hollywood stuff in there. But as kids, like, we didn't know what that was. And I certainly didn't know about Feel Flows or Across the Universe.
No, without a doubt. Now, is it true that song by Harry Forbes that we're going to play, we heard the Commodore. So what version did we hear off the top?
So that there's all kinds of interesting bits of the Magic Shadows ethos. The Commodore 64 piece was in one of I believe, the very first sort of demos that you could buy had a couple of tracks on it, like pre-programmed.
Yeah.
And that was one of them. So I think too, you had a lot of musicians that knew that piece of music, but they didn't know what it was. Like, if you weren't in a border town in America or in Ontario,
right,
you didn't know what Magic Shadows was.
But that's a mind blow. You mean, so you would buy a Commodore 64 and that would be preloaded?
Yes. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the full, I don't know if all of them had it or it was some of them, but there is a full video on YouTube that it was like an hour of stuff. And it also had another scary theme, wasn't Harry Forbes, of a program called The Stationary Ark, which was on TV Ontario. It was a British show. And it had some sort of pop hits and it had other bits and pieces. But what was really funny is in the early days of the internet, like, in the late 80s, early 90s, there's like Usenet, or I think that's what it was called, like the early BBS boards. There's still people trying to figure out what those songs were on that demo. And it's so hilarious because you always see, like, the 3 minute to 4 minute question mark. And it took years and years for someone to go, oh, yeah, that was Harry Forbes. That was Magic Shadow's theme.
Yeah, because you had to be from Ontario or a border town, like you said, to know that. Now, you said a minute ago, you just said bits and pieces when you were talking, but that was a great opportunity, Ed, for you to say bits and bytes. Oh, you're muted. You're gone.
Am I back?
Oh, you're back. Okay, so did you hear me hilariously tell you when you said bits and pieces, you could have said bits and bytes?
Bits and bytes. I am blowing the lead here, Mike. Yeah, bits and bytes.
Well, I'm going to keep you on track. That was a bad joke. That came to me. But let me just finish with Magic Shadows for a minute. So the Harry Forbes composition that we're going to play in a moment, is that the original theme song for Magic Shadows? Or as I just learned from you today, there was another theme before that?
No, that was Saturday Night at the Movies.
Oh, Saturday. So the other Elway Yost show.
Yeah. So yeah, let me just cue it up because not everybody's as in the weeds as we are about all this stuff. Elway Yost, right? He is the guy that actually came up with the name TV Ontario. Before then, it was known as the Ontario Education Communications Authority, the OECA, which was a pretty lame name for a television station in Toronto in the 70s. And they did a sort of internal people that were working there. Everybody throw their name in a hat,
right,
and we'll pick one out. And Elway said, hey, TV Ontario, and they went with that. Everybody remembers him, classic guy. A wonderful documentary exists, by the way, about him. Came out a few years ago. It's on the TVO YouTube channel. Anyways, their big sort of platform show was Saturday Night at the Movies. Right. And they would do a doubleheader on Saturday nights. They would show classic Hollywood golden age movies, and then Elway would discuss them. He would have guests in the studio, and it was an absolutely amazing program because he didn't discriminate. He would have priests on. He would have people, teachers. It wasn't all just movie nerds or things like that. It was a cross section of Toronto people. And so when they were buying these packages of movies from the studios, the way that it worked back then was you went to MGM or you went to Warner Brothers, and of course you want the big ones. You want Casablanca, you want Gone with the Wind, you want Wizard of Oz. But the way the studios worked was they would sell you those, but you also had to take a bunch of crap, right? A bunch of B movies.
Right.
So they were like, well, some of these B movies, like, they're so bad, we can't show these on Saturday night. Like, that'll kill the vibe. So they devised this other program, which became known as Magic Shadows, where they showed the B movies, but they split them up into smaller pieces. So they would only show half an hour of the movie, and they'd still have Elway Yost talking about it and having guests and such, but they would strip it throughout the week. So you'd get, Howard Hawks' The Thing, a horror movie from the 50s, and it would be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, split into 4 pieces. And then always on Fridays, they showed the old serials like Flash Gordon and the old science fiction serial shows, which always had a cliffhanger. Like, there was never any resolution to them because he loved that kind of stuff as well. And obviously, Saturday Night at the Movies was the big prestigious one. Magic Shadows was a bit more scrappy. And I think the opening that we're gushing about here, the music, obviously, but that animation is insane. And it was done by a guy named Herbert Klin. And he was an animator from Los Angeles who had worked on George of the Jungle. You must remember.
Of course. George of the Jungle, friend to
right.
You and me.
And another cat that worked on George of the Jungle is this equally fascinating guy whose name was Ken Sobel. And Ken Sobel was best mates with Elway, and he worked at TV Ontario. They did all this stuff together. And basically, Ken Sobel called in a favor to Herbert Klin. He said, look, man, I don't remember what he owed him, but he owed him money or something. He said, we'll forget all that. If you create this little animated piece for this thing we're doing up here in Toronto. Herbert Klin knocked that thing off literally in like a weekend.
Wow.
And then Harry Forbes came in, laid down the track. All of the people I've interviewed about it, they all say the same thing. They didn't think about it. It just, like it came together. It was just done. Okay. It wasn't even like a big deal. I wasn't anybody thinking, well, we've outdone ourselves here. We've created a really cool piece. Yeah. It was just, okay, we got an opening now. Now let's focus on the program. And it really wasn't until many, many years, I think, after Magic Shadows ended, that people started to ask, wow, what was that? Like, where did that go?
Right.
And very famously, Elwios retired in 1999. And, his son, the story, his son, Graham, wrote the screenplay for the movie Speed, became a huge Hollywood guy, is a huge Hollywood guy right now. But the last movie that Elwios showed on Saturday Night at the Movies was Speed. And he had his son on. So it was a lovely sort of family wrap up of this whole career at TVO. But what was really funny was most of the letters that got sent were congratulating Elwie, were people saying, can you please show the Magic Shadows cartoon? Because by that point it had been off the air for over 10 years. And so he went, oh, sure. And they threw it on there. And then, fast forward when I started putting stuff on YouTube, I guess 2005, 2006, the Magic Shadows was one of the first pieces I put up there, instantly blew up. Yeah. You and I always talk about it. So, I mean, it's in some ways it's never really gone away, right? It's been there since the beginning. But yeah, that program I mentioned, Ken Sobel, he also wrote other TVO programs like Dear Aunt Agnes, Tele Francais, Read Along.
Wow.
And I think, part of what attracts me to all this stuff is that TVO was kind of like a studio, like a classic Hollywood studio, just cranking out grown-up entertainment, children's entertainment, preschool entertainment. And then these people were like writing for all of those things. And it wasn't like they were qualified in the sense that they had a degree in childhood education or any. They were just good writers. They knew, okay, this will make a good story. Magic Shadows also had a producer whose name was Jim Hanley. I don't know if you've heard of that guy before. He was very close with Moses Neimer. They co-created a program called The Originals on City TV. Yeah. He sort of was one of the inner circle with Moses, and there was all this weird Moses TVO crossover stuff with Marshall McLuhan in the 70s. So, Mike, I think you're like me. It's the nexus of characters that is interesting to us. And Toronto is at heart a small town, and all these things crossed over, and I love it. I'm here for that.
Now I'm here to play the Magic Shadows theme song. You ready, Ed?
Let's do it, man.
Here we go.
Colored lights are flying like an angel through the air. Shadows moving faster than the eye. Passing faces, places never ever seen before. They'll take you to the sky, right upon a silver screen where pictures seem to flow like magic, magic, shadows.
Okay, I have questions. So Harry Forbes composes that, and he's singing on that?
No.
Okay.
So that's a funny story, because when I interviewed him, this was about 10 years ago, of course that was one of my first questions. Right. Is that you? He said, no, that wasn't me. I said, who was that? He said, I feel so bad, but I don't remember the guy's name. But what he remembered was he was a hippie from the Yorkville scene. And he was in the studio doing something else, and Harry wrote the lyrics and just said, can you just do this for me? and the guy did it and got paid $20 or, something ridiculous and went away. And that was that.
So approximately what year are we talking about?
This is 1974.
So let's make this a challenge. A lot of people listening right now. So if you know whose voice that is, Ed and I need to know. So don't even pass go. Okay, Mike at torontomike.com. Let me know if you recognize that voice and you know who that was. Okay, so that's a challenge out there. Now, what this is, I know you touched on this on a previous episode, but this is the tribute to Harry Forbes here. So I always heard Beatles influence in that song, as many people do, but you pointed out that you had a conversation with Harry in which he talked about Feel Flows by the Beach Boys. And now when I hear the theme song, I totally hear Feel Flows. Like it's completely switched in my head now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know about you. I mean, I love Beach Boys, but Feel Flows is a bit of a deep cut Beach Boys. I think it's not sort of one of the first.
Well, it's a later Beach Boys, right? Like it's a 70s Beach Boys.
Surf's Up, I think, is it's the album that has a very disturbing cover of like a guy falling off a horse.
Here's a fun fact: when Jim Van Horn, who prior to his TSN career was a 1050 chum rock jock, Jim Van Horn kicked out the jams here on Toronto Mike many years ago. Feel Flows was one of his 10 favorite songs of all time.
Good taste in music. I mean, it's also I think it's on the soundtrack of Vanilla Sky, which is a great Cameron Crowe, very well curated soundtrack. Right. But yeah, it's got that sort of kind of spooky, kind of eerie, very emotional, very bodied sound. And I mean, since hearing much more of his work, many more pieces, you see like these guys that were working with synthesizers and electronics in the 70s, it was so expressive, right? And so many people kind of write off that music and say, well, it's not the same. But I think that early, like that 70s synthesizer stuff is absolutely beautiful. When I spoke to him, I mean, yeah, man, he was such a nice guy and just a wonderful guy. He had all the time in the world to talk to me about this. And it wasn't like I was phoning, from the Toronto Star to do a story about his career. I was just a nerd. Like I was I would love to know more about your work. And then I think I told you this, he sent me like a CD with these songs on them.
Amazing.
And we did briefly talk about, what if we released Magic Shadows as a 45 RPM, right? With the A side being the vocals and there's an instrumental on the B side. And at that time, he was just starting to get a lot of requests from European record labels. So this is like 2013, 2014. Who were, putting out these compilations of library music from the 70s. And I guess they were having their brains blown because they kept coming across his stuff on science documentaries and such. And they said, well, this needs to be re-released and it should be on a compilation. So he had experience at that time and he was loving it because he said, oh, these are these things that I did and I never thought anybody would ever care about them. And, there's people in Germany and, people in London and they're emailing me saying we want to release this on a record in 2014. Like it was insane to him. But what ended up kind of kiboshing any talk of a Magic Shadows record was, again, these dodgy TV Ontario contracts, because technically they own it, even though if you went to them, they would say, oh, we don't have any paperwork. So it nothing unfortunately ever came of it, but
that's too bad. But you're talking about how accommodating Harry was 10 years ago or so when you talked to him, and that sounds amazing that he was a great guy. I'm sorry I never had him on Toronto Mike. This is yet another time I realize when it's too late that I missed out, and I should have had a conversation with Harry on Toronto Mike. That's my bad. But you did have a chat with him. But even 10 years ago, you said some nice words off the top about how few places are left that give a shit about something like this. And you said nice words about what I'm trying to do here on Toronto Mike, but man, you're the godfather, man. I point to at Retrontario and I talk about your archiving and you keeping these stories alive. And even right now, when I was thinking, who's the subject matter expert for Harry Forbes, one name jumped in my head, man, and that's you. So even 10 years ago, I think the Toronto Star and Sun and Globe, like they weren't covering this kind of stuff the way they had in the past. So even 10 years ago, I bet you Harry was happy to be talking to somebody who cared.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you very much, Michael. That's lovely to hear. And the mutual fan clubs are meeting here. I mean, what you do is what you do is remarkable. And I just look at all those people that you've had on and think, in 10 years from now or 20 years from now, sad to say, a lot of those people won't be around. And what is there now? There's these long form interviews with them that you conducted, and I'm working on a book right now, and I'm going through and finding old interviews from 20, 30, 40 years ago because a lot of these people are gone, right. And it's just eternal gratitude that somebody did that, because I think it's a Japanese expression. I won't even try to say it, but it's the idea that when somebody dies, it's the equivalent of a library burning to the ground. Right. And so not saying that an interview is going to get everything out of that library, but right. You're going to at least get, some of the big pieces. And so it's amazing what you do, Michael. Well, thank you so much for what you do. But again, like you said, we're just blowing each other's kisses right now. But can you tell me a little bit about, one question I have is, so was Harry Forbes like a freelance composer who did work for TVO, or was he a TVO staffer? Okay, so as I understand it, the way that it worked is TVO had what you would call in-house musicians. Okay. So they were like session musicians. Right. So yes, he technically did work for TV Ontario. I don't think he showed up at Yonge and St. Clair and had an office and, was there at 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock punching the card. Was Harry Forbes Polkaroo, true or false? But I think, they would have a science show about, I don't know, something and or something about shapes. And there's, we need a 40-second bit of synth noodling. Right. And so they would send, I guess, or phone, because there's no emails. Right. They would send some kind of message and say, Harry Forbes, we need this. And he would provide that. Right. But he was also freelance in that he was contributing music to a very big music library at the time, which was called the Perry, Parry Music Library. And then that stuff would get sold internationally. So what I find fascinating is there's all these music nerds that are full-time basically investigating these music libraries now and figuring out who composed what piece, because these weren't like records that had covers and information of like who wrote this track and who produced this track. They had no information on them. They would literally say like action or speed chase or, man crossing street. Like absolutely the most minimal of information, but it would just be bangers, like absolute bangers of music. And so Harry Forbes became, as I said, really well known in Europe recently because these people were tracking down Perry Music Library records and re-releasing certain things. And as well, there would have been documentaries made around the world that would have used his music, but he never was credited. Right. And even on Magic Shadows, there was no Harry Forbes credit at the end. Right. It took a long time, even for me, to figure out who did that piece of music. Well, thank goodness you didn't. When you describe these libraries and then, producers licensing pieces of music from this library for their documentary or production or whatever, I always think one of the most frequently asked questions I'd get would be, where do I find the primetime sports theme song? Okay. Yeah. Which I think I have loaded up. Let me see if this is it. No, that's actually not it. Let me try this one. Oh, I do have it. Okay.
So this song, which was used for years as a theme of primetime sports on the Fan 590, Bob McCowan, you might have heard of him. It's just like a piece in like one of those library. It's just a piece. Somebody, I don't know who composed it or anything, but that's the kind of stuff Harry Forbes would be contributing to these libraries.
That's absolutely correct. And it is funny because you say that the primetime sports, I think we talked about this years ago. First Choice Super Channel used a lot of library music for years and years and years. And, certain people would think that's the song from that channel. Then other people, no, that's the song from like the football highlights, on my Cincinnati Channel 10, right? Because they were all using the same records to library.
It's amazing. And then people like you give a shit enough to connect dots and find out who the heck is composing this stuff. So there's no truth to the rumor I'm starting right now that Harry Forbes composed the primetime sports theme song.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe he did. Like, I think that's the other crazy thing is that even the musicians didn't keep track of it, right? I mean, it's like if you watch documentaries about the Wrecking Crew, or there's an amazing new documentary actually coming out very shortly about some of the Toronto reggae releases, and it was these session guys that just. They'd go out and they'd have, a pub lunch and have a couple of drinks and then go in and do a bunch of stuff. Right. And then the next day they were doing something different. They weren't, it's not like today where everyone has their own brand and they're LinkedIn and they're keeping track of all the stuff they're working on,
Oh, so shout out to Jay Douglas, a great FOTM who's been over many times. I believe he'll be in that documentary that you're describing right there. I recently had a guest on Toronto Mike, and it was as I finished the episode, I said, I hope Ed Conroy listens to this. So let me just put this bug in your ear to listen to Clive A. Smith on Toronto Mike.
Nelvana Clive Smith?
Yeah, Nelvana's Clive Smith, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I saw him at Fan Expo yesterday. It's so
yeah, of course. He's got the graphic novel, which is great. Although he gives me a graphic novel, and that's amazing, but I was just chatting with my 8-year-old, and I'm like, "Oh, you might like this. It's about a female heroine," and I hadn't quite gone through it. And then my wife decided to leaf through it before Morgan reads this thing, and there's like screwing and stuff in there. And she's like, "You can't give this to Morgan," and I'm like, "That's why you're here, to preview all this nonsense." Okay, but why am I bringing up Nelvana? Not just because I want you to listen to the episode, because when I think of Nelvana, I think of the Care Bears movie, which saves the company after Rock and Rule and all that. And when I think of Care Bears, there's so many great people I think of, not just Melly Fresh, but I think of Lubagoy, okay? So, and then I think...
Nice segue.
Right, so there I'm going. Long-winded way of talking about Bits and Bytes.
Yeah, Bits and Bytes. Okay, I mean, obviously after Magic Shadows, this is the piece of music that Harry Forbes is going to be best remembered by. And even he... acknowledge it's a cheeky one, right? It's basically Kraftwerk's Neon Lights. It's not much different from that. But again, what was the ask here? This was the first program about computers, about computing. It was a foreign topic, really. Nobody knew where this was going, this whole idea of home computing. They got Billy Van, all right? They got Count Frightenstein himself to be the host, playing this kind of everyman that's trying to, figure out how to load his computer. And Lubagoy is the sort of omniscient voice, I guess, God that's walking him through this process. And there's all kinds of cool animation and, another just trippy show, so ahead of its time. Of course, they asked Harry Forbes to do the intro, and he basically did a cover version of Kraftwerk. But it's beautiful. It's a really cool piece. And I would say when I did those posts on social media yesterday, there was just as many people commenting about that than there was about Magic Shadows. Again, I think because curriculum, older kids would have seen that show in high school, and not all necessarily in Ontario. Like TVO had a really good mail order distribution system where any school in North America could order VHS tapes of their programs. So there's kids in Texas, right, that would have seen Bits and Bytes. So yeah, it's a big one. It's a banger. Cue it up. Let it roll. to round it out, we were talking about these European compilations. I have one here. This one just came out last month. It's called Tomorrow's Fashions Library Electronica 1972 to 1987.
Wow.
And this was compiled or curated by a guy named Bob Stanley, who is really one of the coolest people in the world. He was in a band, a Britpop band called Saint Etienne. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They had a couple of hits. They did a cover of Neil Young's Only Love Can Break Your Heart.
Okay.
But now he's kind of like, this elder music aficionado, puts together compilations. So this one has, of course, it has Harry Forbes. It has Alan Hawkshaw. It has a lot of the big names. But this one ripped my head off, mate, because I had an old tape that I had found of Saturday Night at the Movies that didn't have the opening that I knew, right? The opening that we all just, knew as Saturday Night at the Movies. It was this like gnarly synthesizer piece, sounded like, it just sounded very modern. Like it almost sounded like Daft Punk or something. But this tape was from, I want to say 1977, and it was falling apart as I transferred it. So it was really ropey and the sound was coming in and out. And I asked Risa and I asked everybody, what was that original Saturday Night at the Movies song? And nobody knew. Oh, I don't know. It was on one of the library records that was at TVO. And so when this thing was coming out, I listened and oh my God, it was on there, like this original Saturday Night at the Movies song. So I sent that one over to you. I don't know if you have the ability.
Yeah, let me play it right now.
It's called Sam Spence Leaving.
See, Ed, you go on these hunts for these missing treasures, and more often than not, you eventually find what you're looking for.
Well, this one was a big one for me because a dear friend of mine who's no longer with us, he when I first found this said, "Oh man, you see that's Jay Dilla," and I was like, that Jay Dilla was not doing TVO soundtracks in the 70s. And I was also quite chuffed because when Bob Stanley released this record, I tweeted at him with a clip from Saturday Night at the Movies using it, and I said, wasn't sure if you knew, but this was used in Ontario. And then he retweeted it and was like, I love it when, like he's like us, right? He loves to find the where these things ended up. So yeah, I mean, it's not like we're not fixing the world's problems, but we're making it a little more fun, right?
And you're keeping the memory of Harry Forbes alive. I'm sorry he's gone. Like, I mean, I never got a chance to chat with him like you did, but I always you like knowing these guys are out there, and then at some point maybe you can connect and learn more. But sad to hear he passed away.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's imperative when you get the chance to speak to these people, because who knows, man? Who knows how long they're going to be here for?
Well, on that note, Guess who I booked? In fact, later in September, we'll be in this basement chatting me up. You'll never guess. I'm going to have to tell you. But the 101-year-old mother of Peter Gross, Marilyn Gross.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's amazing.
You need time to process that one. So Marilyn Gross, who's apparently as sharp as a tack, so at least one of us will be sharp, will be down here 101 years young. And heck, I was thinking we could talk about the Great Depression. Like, we can talk about things, and we could talk about having Peter Gross as a son. Like, there's so much meat on the bones there. And that's going to be happening here in September. You got to do it before it's too late.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure I've told you over the years, I really wanted to sit down with Mark Daly, and I kept putting it off, and then it was too late, and I vowed then to really never let that happen again.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, look, I think my comment earlier about the state of sort of reporting on the passing of important people in Ontario media. I know our friend Mark Weisblot, he's equally disenchanted with this, that there used to be reporters like Sid Edelman and, a lot of local people that would just keep track of this. And, it's not anybody's fault. The world has changed, but it's shocking to me that a guy of this magnitude, right, who, if you forget everything else, just that Magic Shadows theme song on its own merit was a huge part of our shared existence and our experience with television. So yeah, I'm so glad, Mike, that you reached out and that we were able to do this. And hopefully we've dropped some nuggets of information. There's some further studies in there. If people want to know more, they want to check out some more of these cool library releases. And yeah, man, let's just keep doing what we do.
Last question on your way out. Will there be another volume of Christmas Crackers this coming December 2024?
Wow. It's, I don't see why not, but what's so crazy is when you said that, I don't know about you, but I've had a really difficult time keeping track of time lately. I keep forgetting what month it is and all this stuff, and I can't believe that we're looking down the barrel of Labor Day. So when you say Christmas, in my mind, like, oh, that's so far away, but it's not really.
No. And we missed a year. We missed a year.
I know. Well, I know we've missed a few years because I think one of the COVID or something, but it's not an annual, but it's a good time. So yes, let's make sure that we do Christmas Crackers this year, Mike.